Hi everybody, it's great to be with you again. I hope and pray that you have stayed safe and well this week. A man died and St. Peter met him at the pearly gates. St. Peter said to the man, "Here's how it works. You need 100 points to make it into heaven. You tell me all the good things you've done and I will give you a certain number of points for each item, depending on how good it was. When you reach 100 points, you get in." "Okay," said the man. "I was married to the same woman for 50 years and never cheated on her, not even in my heart." "That's wonderful," said St. Peter. "That's worth 3 points." "3 points?" questioned the man. "Well, I attended church my whole life and supported its ministries with my tithes and service." "Terrific," said St. Peter. "That's certainly worth a point." "1 point?" "I started a soup kitchen in my city and worked in a shelter for homeless veterans," said the man. "Fantastic! That's good for 2 more points," said St. Peter. 2 points? Exasperated, the man cried, "At this rate, it'll just be by the grace of God that I ever get into heaven." "Bingo! 100 points," said St. Peter. "Come on in." We Christians spend an awful lot of time these days worrying about who's going to get into heaven and who's not. We worry if we're going to make it through those pearly gates. Have I done enough good deeds in my life? Can God be trusted to keep an accurate count of all the good things I've done? Sometimes it seems we get so caught up in trying to figure out who's going to get into heaven and who's not, that we forget what it is that we've been called to do. Today's passage from the Gospel of Matthew spells out clearly what it is that we're called to do. Listen carefully. This is from Matthew 13. "That same day Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea. Such great crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat there while the whole crowd stood on the beach. And he told them many things in parables, saying, 'Listen, a sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seeds fell on the path, and the birds came and ate them up. Other seeds fell on rocky ground where they did not have much soil, and they sprang up quickly since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched, and since they had no root, they withered away. Other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Other seeds fell on good soil and brought forth grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. Let anyone with ears listen.' Hear then the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what is sown in the heart. This is what was sown on the path. As for what was sown on rocky ground, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. Yet such a person has no root, but endures only for a while. And when trouble or persecution arises on account of the word, that person immediately falls away. As for what was sown among the thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of the world and the lure of wealth choke the word, and it yields nothing. But as for what was sown on good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it, who indeed bears fruit and yields in one case 100-fold, in another 60, and in another 30. Most of us have heard this parable a time or two before. We've heard it called the parable of the sower or the parable of the soils. But maybe it should be called the 100-fold harvest, because it really is a story about abundance. Let me recap what happened in the parable. A sower, a farmer, went out to sow seeds. He didn't carefully prepare the soil with just the right pH balance and then inject the seeds into the ground like farmers do today. In Jesus' day, farmers cast the seeds first and then plowed the land. So it's really no surprise that some seeds would fall on hard soil. Some seeds would land on ground too rocky for good roots. Some would land among the thorns and the weeds, and some would land on good, fertile soil. Those were the facts of life, and everyone, including Jesus, knew it. So in the parable, the seeds landed in all of the places I just named. In addition to the seeds that fell on the various types of soil, some seeds just barely hit the ground before the birds came along and gobbled them up. But the seeds that fell on the good soil, those were the seeds that grew. They produced Some brought forth 30-fold, some brought forth 60, and some brought forth 100-fold. In Jesus' day, a 7-fold harvest meant a good year for a farmer. 10-fold meant abundance. 30-fold would feed a village for an entire year, and 100-fold would let the farmer retire to a villa by the Sea of Galilee. Jesus' crowd understood the trials and tribulations of first-century farming. He, of course, used language and imagery that they would recognize. Then he went on to explain what the parable meant. The seeds are the good news. The sower is the one who shares the good news. Sometimes the hearer of the good news doesn't understand it. Sometimes the hearer receives the good news with great joy and excitement, but the minute trouble arises, the hearer turns away. Sometimes the hearer is too caught up in worldly matters and wealth, and so the good news isn't able to take root in his or her heart. And sometimes the hearer just gets it. The hearer hears the good news and understands it. And through that one hearer comes an abundant crop, maybe 100-fold, maybe 60, maybe 30. The sower in the parable doesn't spend time trying to figure out which soil is capable of producing. The sower just sows the seeds here and there and leaves the rest to God. I'm reminded of the story of the English traveler who loved the wildflowers that grew on the sides of the lanes and in the fields of England. He loved the flowers so much that whenever he traveled abroad, he would fill his pockets with the seeds and then scatter them everywhere he went. The sower in the parable has just one job, sowing seeds. He doesn't need to worry about whether or not the seeds will grow. He only has to concern himself with scattering them wherever he goes. The rest is up to God. It's in God's hands and it will be in God's time. The thing about sowing seeds is that we never really know when a seed might actually grow. Sometimes we don't see any growth for a long, long time. In fact, we may never see it. But that doesn't mean it won't happen. Again, our job isn't to worry and fret over whether or not all of the seeds we scatter will someday grow. Our job is to just keep scattering the seeds. The seeds we sow don't have to be monumental. We aren't all expected to become the next Joel Osteen or the next Billy Graham. The seeds we sow can be simple ones. A kind word to a stranger, a smile as you pass someone on the sidewalk, although with a mask they can't see it. Being patient while you stand in the checkout line at the grocery store. Reacting with kindness when someone is short with you. Expecting the best from people and not always the worst. Lending a hand when someone needs it. Or wearing a mask in public and social distancing so that you can keep your neighbors safe. These seeds can be the smallest, simplest things. Only God knows what great things might come from them. Our job is to keep sowing the seeds. I'm going to close with the story of the young boy who complained to his father that most of the church hymns were boring. Can you imagine? They were far too behind the times. The tunes were tiresome and the words were meaningless. After listening to his complaints, his father said to him, "If you think you can write better hymns, then why don't you give it a try?" The boy went to his room and wrote his first hymn, "When I Survey the Wondrous Cross." The year was 1690, and the teenager's name was Isaac Watts. Joy to the World is also among the nearly 350 hymns written by him. What kinds of seed are you sowing these days, my friends? Are you sowing seeds of love and compassion? Are you sowing seeds of fear and anger and frustration? And where are you sowing these seeds, my friends? Because the where is just as important as the kinds of seeds that you're sowing. Our job is to sow the seeds. Seeds of love and compassion, seeds of joy and gratitude, seeds of justice and wholeness. Thankfully, the harvest isn't dependent on us. That part is in God's hands. Amen. And thanks be to God. Have a wonderful week. Stay safe and stay well. And remember that you are loved.